Welcome to Infrastructure at Risk. Protect your investments. This is part of the online series Providing Resilience Education for Planning in Rhode Island, or PREP-RI. I'm Bill Patnode, a principal engineer at the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, and I'm joined by Mike DeLuca, Director of Community Development for Narragansett. Public infrastructure is expensive, built to last, and difficult to relocate. Decisions about constructing new infrastructure or adapting what is there now must be strategic and often incremental. Designing with future conditions in mind will improve public safety and avoid costly repairs and hassles after hazard events. By the end of this module, you'll be able to describe the impacts of climate change on infrastructure, identify vulnerability assessments that have been performed for different sectors in Rhode Island, and recognize how your community can use state assessments to inform local plans and actions. Natural hazards already threaten Rhode Island's infrastructure today, with increasing risks projected for the future. Affected infrastructure includes wastewater systems, transportation such as roads, bridges, ports, and harbors, drinking water systems, and other critical infrastructure, including emergency services and energy networks. For many of these sectors, statewide assessments have been conducted to evaluate the implications of climate change. Because water naturally flows downhill, wastewater treatment facilities and pump stations are often located at low elevations and within floodplains. Many of you likely remember the impacts to wastewater treatment plants during the 2010 floods. A recent study of the vulnerability of Rhode Island's 19 major wastewater facilities to flooding and storm surge, among other findings, determined that 7 of these could be predominantly inundated in a catastrophic event. The study includes individual facility assessments and suggests adaptive strategies such as floodproofing, elevating, or relocating equipment. Assessments of state and municipal transportation assets found that every coastal community in Rhode Island will likely be impacted by sea level rise. More than 4 miles of roadway are expected to flood at high tide given 1 foot of sea level rise, and over 60 miles at 3 feet of sea level rise. A 1% annual chance storm would flood many additional miles of roadway. Many bridges, rail segments, bike trails, and RIPTA routes will be affected in the various scenarios as well. Associated fact sheets for each municipality list vulnerable assets. An assessment of the impacts of climate change on Rhode Island drinking water utilities found that all will be affected to some degree. Modeling estimates show that water utility losses from sea level rise, flooding, and hurricanes will total almost $90 million by the year 2084. The study presents strategies to prevent infrastructure losses from hazards and ensure adequate potable water supplies, and suggests integrated management and planning to enhance adaptation. Rhode Island's emergency management planning efforts evaluate a broad array of critical facilities. These can be used as a starting point for municipal plans. It is important to know your risk, make a plan, and take action, as outlined in PREP-RI's adaptation module. Municipalities can use these state assessments to screen for impacts in their own community, tailor recommendations, and develop priorities. Many communities have already begun to examine infrastructure and take actions to adapt and protect their assets for future conditions. A preliminary assessment of infrastructure impacts must be included in your comprehensive plan, along with implementation actions to address priority issues. The Municipal Hazard Mitigation Plan can then be used to further assess priorities and operationalize proactive and post-recovery actions. This sets the stage to incorporate long-term adaptations to vulnerable infrastructure, such as pump stations or municipal facilities, in the capital improvement plan. Regarding the transportation improvement plan, municipalities should work with the state to include adaptation for projects selected. Including adaptation actions in local plans also improves the chance of securing funds for priority projects. I'll now turn it over to Mike to show examples of how communities have begun to adapt their infrastructure to changing conditions.
The Scarborough Wastewater Treatment Plant in Narragansett demonstrates 3 general types of action that can be used to rethink how infrastructure can be adapted to reduce risk to current and future conditions. First, the new berm is designed to protect critical elements of the facility and to reduce impacts from coastal flooding. The design includes consideration of future sea level rise in addition to storm surge that could affect the plant. Second, generators at the pump station were elevated to accommodate flooding that will likely occur during its life. Third, in decades to come, when the facility's functional life comes to an end, its replacement will likely be relocated to avoid impacts. The future site would be identified well in advance to allow time to acquire the land and secure sufficient funding. In Warren, officials consulted FEMA's flood maps and storm tools maps to determine the vulnerability of its wastewater facility. To rectify the differences between the 2 map sets, the town worked with CRMC and RIDEM to come up with a reasonable standard for construction which factored in the expected life of the upgraded facility. A cost-benefit analysis revealed that certain expensive equipment should be relocated or flood-proofed, while it would be more cost-effective to let other lower-value equipment flood during an event and then have it replaced. In Middletown, Third Beach Connector Road was elevated to improve resiliency and traffic safety. At the same time, power lines were buried to prevent wind from causing power outages. While elevating does not avoid the problem of storm surge or sea level rise indefinitely, it demonstrates a thoughtful compromise between projections of future hazards, site constraints, and the need to provide safe access. On Block Island, the Rhode Island Vulnerability Assessment identified Corn Neck Road as one of the municipality's most vulnerable roads. In fact, the road experienced flooding and wave damage in both 2010 and 2012. The town's comprehensive plan states the need to identify alternatives to mitigate future impacts from storms and climate change, and the town's hazard mitigation plan identifies raising or relocating the road as a high priority. Funded by a community development block grant, studies have begun and stakeholders have engaged in developing alternatives for potential action. Sea level rise is being incorporated into new projects. The Providence River pedestrian bridge design incorporated elevation as a condition of the CRMC permit issued to the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. In Barrington, the reconstruction of the White Church Bridge incorporated sea level rise as a result of discussions between the agencies. Concerned about its drinking water infrastructure and the potential risk to over 1,800 properties, South Kingstown relocated its water main along Matunic Beach Road to reduce exposure to erosion and flooding. For some vulnerable areas, municipalities are coordinating with state agencies to improve long-term outcomes. With the new 10-year Transportation Improvement Plan and its annual reviews, there will be more opportunities for discussions with state agencies about transportation priorities, projects, and adaptation actions. The CRMC and DEM can provide vital assistance during infrastructure planning to help assess risk and design accommodations for sea level rise and storm surge. Most successful funding comes in the form of a package or combination of local funds that leverage outside funds such as grants or loans. The town of Middletown is dedicating $2 million from their Sewer Enterprise Fund to secure an additional $4 million in financing from the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank. Together, this funding will be used to reduce the impacts of aging infrastructure, protect the system from major storm events, and reduce the risk of the station going offline during an emergency. Now I'll turn it back to Bill to finish up.
The state has invested in identifying vulnerable infrastructure so that municipal decision makers may begin to incorporate adaptation action into local plans and develop funding strategies. Small steps to adapt to climate change may be reasonable short-term strategies that protect existing infrastructure and help communities bounce back after a hazardous event. That said, preparing for the long term is key. Thank you for viewing this module. Go to the PrepRI website to see the resources document, to give us your feedback and get your certificate, and to view other modules. The PrepRI team acknowledges the support of statewide leaders, experts, and practitioners who helped to make this module a reality. And thanks to the PrepRI team for pulling this module together.